welcome to the next episode of Healthy Talks. I am your host, Julie, and today I'm honored to be with our head of nursing, Miriam Palk. Hi, Miriam. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm fine, Julie. Thank you.
So, Miriam, you've been with us for a very long time now, almost 10 years, and since you've had your last interview, how has your roles and responsibilities evolved at ICG Medical?
Well, when I joined ICG Medical, which will be 9 years ago now, it was a much smaller company and it was based pretty much solely in the United Kingdom. And we did have our Indian staff, but the rest of the countries that we're now in, they were just ideas, I suspect, that Adrian had at the time. So my role when I came, there wasn't somebody that was the head of nursing before me. So a lot of development work has happened working within ICG. It's been huge. I mean, the amount of growth in the business has been massive. The nature of the nurses that we work with has changed. We now do things like complex care, which we didn't do back then. We were mostly hospital based. So in terms of the breadth of the business, that obviously has impacted on how my role has evolved. Yes. But we've also had changes within how nursing is structured, which again have impacted on my role as well.
And what major challenges have you encountered during the past 9 years? How did you overcome them?
So I think the first thing I would say is that all challenge is a positive thing. You can look at a challenge as a problem, or you can actually look at how you can make a solution out of it.
Correct.
And one of the biggest things that occurred for nursing in general was a change in the way that nurses had to prove that we were fit to remain nurses. Okay, so I think the first challenge I would say was in 2016 when the Nursing and Midwifery Council changed the way that nurses proved that they were fit to retain their licenses. So that's something called revalidation. And that was something that was a bit of a shock to a lot of us. We had done something similar, but suddenly we had a more formal approach, and there was a requirement for the evidence that we would be providing to be considered by other nurses on the register or by people who the NMC had said were suitable. So for our agency nurses, that meant a huge volume of nurses that needed that level of assistance. So that was number one. COVID, clearly huge. Yes. At the time when business tailed off because, hospitals were dealing with COVID cases rather than with all their general work in the United Kingdom and around the world, my job got busier and busier because not only was I responsible for ensuring that as a business in the United Kingdom that we had the correct processes in place to support our nurses. We also had staff all around the world, and by then we had our staff in South Africa as well, where I would then be giving advice on the COVID requirements within countries. So I got very adept at learning what was required in the different countries. We also lost nurses, which was very difficult, and staff, and so when you think back on COVID, it had a massive impact for the world and us as a business. And our impact, the impact that we had on it, was trying to keep staff safe, make sure that they had all the information that they needed, but also to make sure that we as staff within that business were able to continue to do our job. So one of the big advantages was the ability to see that as a business we could manage from distance.
Yes.
Which was massive. And I think everybody would agree that, if COVID hadn't have happened, businesses would still probably have been moving towards that now, but suddenly they were able to do that. And heroes of the day for us were people like Mo, making sure that we all had the kit that we needed, the locations, that we had systems in place that enabled us to keep in touch with each other, and did the same thing for the nurses. But it was immensely difficult because our agency nurses, for some of them, they went from having a reasonable income to having no income whatsoever. So that was quite difficult. For me, technology has always been a bit of a challenge. I usually joke with people and say, if you've got a new technology you need tested, give it to me first, because if anyone's going to break it, it will be me. So I've had to learn new ways of new systems and new processes, and there'll be future new processes and new systems as well. So I think, overall, there's been a lot of challenge, and just the way that the NHS and healthcare organisations perceive agencies and agency nursing has been immensely difficult over the last few years. And that shows itself in the way that our nurses feel that they are treated sometimes by their colleagues. So it's just about how you manage all of that, and you keep a sense of humour.
Yes.
You deal with the stresses and the strains as they come along, but you also have to try and make sure that, you are able to manage and cope effectively, because if you can do that, if I can do that, then that hopefully gives confidence to those that I work with.
Yes, and I think people who aren't in the healthcare industry doesn't actually fully realize what the impact that COVID has on a nurse and their own mental health well-being.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry for your loss for your friends and colleagues, but I do commend people like you who still to this day go through it, and you are there for everyone who can't be there.
And I think the important thing that when there are difficulties, some people have an almost immediate reaction to them. For some people, it's head down, get on, and just cope and do what you need to do. The impact for them can be further on down the line. And certainly within the United Kingdom, the demand for mental health services has increased dramatically. And some of that is around the fact that people talk about mental health now and issues around mental health in a way that certainly when I began my training, I started my training in 1983, that was unheard of. Unless you were doing a mental health placement, it wasn't thought about. Things like dementia were considered. If you were a mental health nurse, then obviously your training was around that. But as a general nurse, you weren't given that level of understanding that happens now. I have huge admiration for our mental health nurses because they have to deal with some of life's really difficult scenarios. As a nurse looking after somebody who's got a physical illness, there are things that I can see, there are aids, whatever it might be, that I can reach for.
Yes.
For our mental health nurses, it's a much more fluid arrangement. And I think that as nurses, we all have to recognise and respect the expertise of those that work in different branches of nursing. And I think sometimes that's not something that we are all very good at doing. Sometimes we get a bit elitist. And that's not intentional. It's just, we have our passions. I'm an elderly care nurse by background. And that's my passion. I can't bear to hear of poor elderly care service, or of older people not getting the care that they need. That's my bandwagon and my mantra, because I'll be 60 this year, but I do plan to live long enough, a lot longer, to be able to say to somebody, oh, when I was a matron, I wouldn't have let you get away with that sort of scenario. I think some people probably would say I probably do that already, but it's not intentional now. But it will be when I'm in my 90s.
Yes, that's definitely. And in your opinion, what have been some of the key factors contributing to your long-term success at ICG Medical?
I think it's like with most things, people need resilience. They need to have trust and confidence in themselves as well as in others. I think that sometimes you need to have a sense of humour. I take some stick over time around things like my football team, or other things that I do. I think having having an interest in things that are very different from what you do in your working life can also have an impact. So I love making cards, and I'm not an artist. I can't draw for tuppence, but in terms of being able to make cards and jewellery and things like that, they're things that give me great pleasure, and they're very different. Yes. They're very mindful because I have to concentrate on what I'm doing. And when we used to have our office, our old office in London, and I used to come into London, I used to take great joy in making the Christmas cards and the birthday cards for staff, and we'd raise money for the foundation. So those sorts of things help. I think the joy of seeing people develop and progress is something that I've always enjoyed right from the very beginning of my career. And so it's really lovely when I see people, Tammy, Beth, all those people that have moved and progressed through our organisation. And I think that's a great, that's a sense of pleasure that I get seeing people with that development. And I'm a great believer in giving people opportunity and encouraging them to stretch themselves. And sometimes that's not the right thing for people, and so they decide that it's time for them to go and do something else. That's absolutely fine. And I think that ICG, certainly as my only non-NHS employer, although it's actually only my third employer at all, I see the things in ICG that are important to me. Family, the philosophy that we have, that we're a family, that's really important, because you don't have to like everybody in your family. Everybody has, but I always say, I can moan about my family, but I won't let anybody else moan about my family. And I think that, family is really important, and it's part of our ethos about how we function, how we work. And you don't always get on with every member of your family, but that doesn't mean that you can't respect them and be part of that. And I always used to say to the nurses when I worked clinically, the art of being a good nurse is that the person you dislike the most on the ward, whether that's a patient, a doctor, or whatever, has no idea that you dislike them, because you treat them respectfully, you treat them, my mum and dad family always taught me that you treat people how you would want to be treated.
Correct.
But I'm also no angel, so there are times when you don't quite get it right. But then it's about acknowledging that actually what you did wasn't right, or maybe you've upset somebody because I was angry about something, but you then have to be big enough to say to them, look, I'm really sorry, that wasn't what I wanted to do, that wasn't my intention, and be brave enough to apologize. And I think that's what that comfort in ICG, to make a mistake and learn from it, is important. There's no crime in making a mistake. For me, the crime is repeating the mistake because you haven't learned from it the first time around.
That's true. That's very true. It's wise words as well. Can you share some memorable milestones or achievements that at ICG that you're particularly proud of? There must be tons, but is there a specific one?
I think it's really hard when somebody says to you, what's the, what are you most proud of? I think the thing I'm really proud of are the relationships with my colleagues that I've been able to establish. I think the other thing that is the fact that we are a business, and everybody understands that as a business, we need to make money to keep the business going. But what I'm most proud of is I know if I needed to have a nurse come and look after me, I would want it to be an ICG nurse, because I really believe that we offer the highest level of compliance for our nursing staff. Like all nurses, we hate doing paperwork, we hate doing all the training bit, but actually it's critical. We have that in place. We have teams that genuinely care about the people that they're offering work to. And I think that I'm confident that our nurses have the best of opportunities. And so for me, that's what I would say are probably some of the things I'm most proud of. The one thing I would say is the level of support that we can give nurses through revalidation is really important to me. Because I have to revalidate every 3 years. So I know it's not always an easy thing for us to do, to find the time to do it as we go along, etc. But I think having those sorts of things in place is really important. So I wouldn't say that there's any one thing that I'm proud of or any one thing that I'm not proud of. I think that each day there's something a bit different, which I think is really important. I hate boredom. Yes. Can't do with boredom. Variety. Variety is the spice of life.
Definitely is.
Enjoying this episode? Ever thought of starting your own podcast? Podup.com is your go-to. They've got everything you need to run a pro show, including 35 or more AI-powered tools for success. Sign up today for a free starter account and get 15% off with the code HealthETalks15. The code is HealthETalks15. Plus, check out podallies.com for a done-for-you podcasting experience, complete with website, social media, and editing. Start now and let's launch your podcast together.
And in your last interview with us, you mentioned how nurses faces challenges such as the demographic shift and the shortage of registered nurses. Has that improved since your last talk to us?
I would say that when in the United Kingdom, when you look at the data that is produced by the Nursing Midwifery Council, there are more nurses on the register than there were when I last was interviewed. But the demographics of where they're coming from is very different. So a significant proportion, almost 50% of the nurses on the register did not train in the United Kingdom. They came from other countries, or they came from other countries to do their training here, which is significant. There is an increase, I believe, in the number of male nurses on the register, which I think is, again, nursing for most of my career has been very female dominated, but it's moving to equate that out. I think that the age of nurses is changing. When I started my training, most of the nurses in my class, we were of a similar age, 18, 19 years old. But now nurses are often, this is often a second career for people. Yes. So they're joining the profession as students and qualifying at an older age. But of course, you can't force somebody to retire based on their age, as Adrian tells me. So, at the end of the day, my belief is, as a nurse, as I said earlier, I'm going to be 60 this year. I have no intention of retiring. I will stop working when I'm no longer able to do the job.
Yes, because you're passionate. It's your passion. It's your calling.
But also, it's how no matter where you work, if you're still able to do the job, then you still have something to give to whatever organisation, whatever role it is that you have, whether it's me as a nurse, whether it's somebody else who, I don't know, a secretary, PA, whether it's a policeman, whatever. If you can do the job and you still love the job that you do, then you should be enabled to carry on with it. And that's sort of the view that I take on it. I love my profession. It's the right profession for me. I'm always positive for people who say to me, well, I think I might like to be a nurse. Because actually, there's a lot that it can give people. And so I think that's the thing that, that would be my message to people is, find what you love. If you love what you do, it's not like work.
Yes, it's not work. If you don't love your job, if you love your job, it's not working. It's your passion. And are there any initiatives or projects that you're currently involved in to promote professional development and education among nurses?
So there's quite a lot of things that I'm dabbling in, shall we say. So obviously, as as a group of agencies, we now look after nurses in multiple countries, and each country has its core teams that are looking at how things are done and what needs to be done. I'm very fortunate that in the United Kingdom, we also have 2 registered managers who are both nurses, Will King in Scotland and Anne Kelly in Northern Ireland. And so they've been able to, in their areas, look at what is it that's needed for those nurses in those locations. In England, one of the big areas of work that I'm working very closely with Green staff on is the development of their complex care and home care services, where people are looked after in their own environments who have got extreme conditions. You know, they may be end of life care, or it may be very young children who've got severe disabilities. So it's really interesting to be able to work with the different brands on the different things that they're going on. With Cromwell and Clinical 24, for example, still making sure that we're meeting the needs of the acute nurses, that we're meeting the needs of nurses in care homes as well as hospital-based or community-based. So I think there's just a lot. I have a really, really poor relationship with the word no. If somebody asks me to do something or asks me if we can do something, my boss is forever telling me that I don't know how to say no. And my mum will tell you that I don't know how to say no. I don't. Because generally, if somebody comes to me with an idea or help or asking for my help, I see it as part of my responsibility to see how I can facilitate that. It doesn't mean I'm going to do the work for them. So I get involved in lots of things. And some of them work better than others, but each one is a learning opportunity for me or for others.
No, correct. And as a leader in nursing, what advice would you give to aspiring nurses who are navigating their careers in today's healthcare industry?
I think the piece of advice that I would give is the piece of advice I was given on my very first ward as a student nurse. The sister on the ward, her name was Shirley. I was really, really nervous because this was this was what I'd studied hard for as a school child, to get my A levels and everything so I could go into nursing. And on my first day, we started the program by doing half a day a week for 2 weeks, and then a whole day, and then 2 days. On my first half a day, I arrived on the ward, and Shirley, the ward sister, who we called Sister Walker, said, "Don't stand there looking like a lemon. Find something that you know you can do and do it. And then find something that you're not so sure if you can do and do it. And just keep doing that." And that stood me in good stead, because I've never come across something where I've immediately thought to myself, "Oh, I'm never doing that." I've come across things and thought, "Oh, I don't want to do that yet." But it's just that as a nurse, you will be faced with thousands and thousands and thousands of choices over even just the 3 years of your training period. And then when you become a staff nurse, I remember I qualified from being a student on the Saturday to being a staff nurse on the Sunday. And on my first day as a staff nurse, somebody shouted, "Oh, staff nurse." I turned around looking to see who they were looking for, and then made exactly the same mistake not that long after, when I became a ward sister. My first day on the ward as a ward sister, I heard somebody shout, "Sister," and I looked to see where Sister was, and then I glanced down and noticed it was me in the navy blue uniform. So, all sorts of things. I think don't pigeonhole yourself when you're in a profession. I started as a staff nurse working in very acute areas, but found my passion of elderly care after I'd been qualified, I think 3 years. So you just don't know. I think if you put a set of blinkers on and only look in one direction, you can miss opportunities. So
Yes.
take the blinkers off and don't miss the opportunities that are out there, and actually go out and actively try and find those opportunities rather than just expect them to be delivered to you on a plate. I suppose that would be my advice to aspiring nurses. And just know that you're doing something that you love. And if you're not doing something that you love, maybe you need to find something that's just a little bit different. Maybe that particular setting isn't quite right for you, or maybe it's just that hospital that's not quite right for you, and maybe the one next door will be. But the other thing as well is, if something doesn't work out, don't be afraid to go back to where you came from, because we've had staff with ICG who have gone off to try different things and then decided actually they'd like to come back, and they bring back with them a whole new different experience. And I think that, you know, that's really important for nurses. If you go and work in a different area, you don't lose what you've already learned, but if you come back, you bring back what you've learned. And I think that's the big advantage of agency nurses. They work in multiple different wards and departments, and they can share what they know and what they've learned with their colleagues.
Yes, definitely.
And I think that that's hugely important.
It fosters that sense of community once again, of sharing knowledge and receiving knowledge. And what are your goals and aspirations for the coming years at ICG?
Well, my first goal is I'm going on a cruise in a few weeks' time. So I'm really looking forward to that, because I've never been on a cruise ship before. So that will be really interesting. I will celebrate my 60th birthday. That's a bit scary, because I never... Yeah, when you're 18, you think 21's old, but I'm going to be 60 in October. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm looking forward for ICG. We are moving into target recruit, and so a whole new system, whole new way of learning. That will test my technical skills and my technical abilities, I'm sure. But I'm really looking forward to that and seeing how that goes. And I'm just looking forward to seeing how ICG will continue to develop. And each brand within it, there is such a big driving force about people receiving care closer to home. So things like the domiciliary care settings, the home care, the complex care type settings, all of those supporting people more in the community are really important. And so for me, I think that I see that as, you know, potentially, it's just, for me, it's always, for me, it's about looking forward. As much as I like to reflect on things and look backwards, I do that as a process of moving forward. So for me, it's about, you know, how as a business, how does my role fit into that future? You know, and so for me, that's all really, really important. Yes. And I would want to see the nursing profession advance and develop. If I just think about what it was like when I started in 1983 to what it's like now, you know, 31 years later, 41 years later, even if I could add up, it's massively different, hugely different. But it's not all happened in one go. It's been incremental, the change. And I think that sometimes that's why sometimes you do go back and, you know, things that were popular when I started my nurse training went out of fashion. Some of them have come back. And the typical response to that is the matron. There was no such thing as a matron when I did my nurse training. They didn't exist. They were the 1960s, early 1970s. And then in the late 90s, early 90s, they were brought back. And they're still there now, you know. So I think there's huge opportunity for nursing to develop and grow. And there's huge opportunity for ICG to develop and grow as well.
And I'm also just as looking forward to see where ICG goes in the next few years. And lastly, Miriam, besides going on your cruise, how do you plan to celebrate the significant milestone of your 9th anniversary?
Right, my 9th anniversary, I normally have I normally try and get in before my line manager does to tell everybody it's my anniversary. So that'll be fun. I haven't really thought about what else I will do. It's a Saturday. So I'm not sure what I will do. I'm sure my family might have some ideas, but that will be up for them to decide. But I do know where I'll be spending my 10th anniversary, because that's cruise number 2, and I'll be on a boat going to the Norwegian fjords on the 1st of June 2025.
Oh, wow.
So that's where I'll be celebrating my 10th anniversary.
Just a cruise every year from here on out.
No. It was just the fact that I'm going on the cruise in August with one group of friends, and then another group of friends said, "Oh, well, we want to do one, but we want to go here." So I said, "Oh, fine, sign me up. I'm there. I'm going." But it's always a bit of a standing joke, because the people that I'm going away with, none of them are nurses, and they all make this false assumption that because I'm going on holiday with them and I'm a nurse, I'll look after them. No, I'm on holiday. I'll leave that to somebody else.
That's brilliant. Well, Miriam, thank you so much for your time today. Your insights and your words of wisdom really resonates not only with me, but I'm sure with our listeners as well. And the advice you've given for new nurses, I think that can resonate with the everyday person. Just be, if you're passionate, go for it. If you're not passionate or happy with what you're doing, go into a different department. Don't be scared. Don't have your blinders on. So I really do thank you for your time today. It was really lovely to chat with you.
That's okay, Julie, you're welcome.
And to all our listeners out there, remember to like and subscribe.